The United Kingdom and the Canadian government have jointly launched, as part of this Media Freedom Conference, a specific initiative of what they call a high-level panel of legal experts that will look into issues relating to the protection of freedom of expression in general, freedom of the press in particular in all its aspects, and thereby, protect journalists at a time when they're increasingly under threat, even being murdered, and that's the highest form of censorship. So it's a privilege for me when I saw the other people on the panel, I said, wow, this is an opportunity to listen and to learn and to experience the expertise of those who've been in the trenches all these years. And one of the things I'm hoping that we'll be able to do as part of this is set up a protection charter as one of the means of protecting journalists. Mohammed Fahmy and Alex Neave had that idea several years ago. I introduced, as a member of Parliament, legislation to that effect. In the course of our meeting yesterday, which was our first meeting, I mentioned that possibility, and we have a working group now set up for that purpose, of which I'll be a member. And I'm hoping we can move forward among other things, because I look at this as involving sort of the 5 Ps. Preventing harm to journalists, protecting the free press and journalists in that regard, prosecuting those who are violating their rights, partnering civil society, the legal expertise and the like, and finally prescribing, coming up with principles, with standards, with normative guidelines, all in order to, because if we protect a free press, we'll be protecting democracy. If we don't have a free press, we are undermining democracy. What we've done is we've set up working groups on different themes. For example, a working group that will deal with how do we sanction the violators of journalists' rights, Magnitsky-type sanctions and the like. How do we establish a transparency principle? How do we bring to justice those who are, in fact, you have a situation now where only 10% of those who are violating the rights of journalists, the rights of a free press, are being in any way held accountable. So you have a culture of impunity. How do we therefore combat the culture of impunity? How do we get governments on board so that they understand that protecting freedom of expression, protecting a free press, protecting journalists, as I mentioned, is a protector for democracy as a whole? And at a time when, as the Prague Declaration on Democratic Renewal put it, democracies everywhere are under threat, and those who care about it must come to its defense. Well, we're looking at this panel through the looking glass of protecting freedom of the press to protecting democracy. Magnitsky legislation needs to not only be adopted by countries but implemented. I'm happy that in Canada, for example, we've sanctioned Russians, we've sanctioned Saudis now as a result of the brutal murder of Khashoggi, South Sudanese, Venezuelans. In other words, we not only adopted the legislative or the legal framework, but we have in fact implemented it. I think the UK has to begin implementing it, and one of the problems sometimes is that countries who are implementing it are implementing it only with regard to Russia. But that's a mistake. This whole notion here was global justice for Sergei Magnitsky legislation. It's to hold human rights violators accountable wherever they may be, through visa bans, through asset seizures. As Boris Nemtsov once put it with regard to the Magnitsky legislation at the time, he said, this is the most pro-Russian legislation because it's on behalf of the Russian people. It's not against the Russian people, certainly, and not against the Russian government. It's in order to protect the people and to hold the individuals who are violating the rights of the people accountable. Same thing with regard to the journalists. We want to protect the journalists, we want to hold those who violate their rights accountable, and we want to be doing this both to protect the principle like freedom of the press and to protect a democracy in that regard. The particular prisoner groups and the individuals that we've been involved in very much been serving as international legal counsel for Raif Badawi. Just marked the 7th anniversary of his imprisonment for saying 7 years ago what the Crown Prince himself, Mohammed bin Salman, was saying when he went on his charm offensive last year. So it would appear to me that the Crown Prince should free at this point Raif Badawi, because he's basically saying what the Crown Prince had been saying: a more moderate Islam, a more open Saudi Arabia, and the like. Regrettably, more human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia have been arrested rather than be freed. And the interesting thing is, a year ago, our foreign minister, who's been here, Chrystia Freeland, tweeted a call for the release of Raif Badawi and his sister Samar Badawi. The Saudis erupted in fury. They ejected the Canadian ambassador, recalled the Saudi ambassador from Canada, suspended all trade and investment, etc. Not one of the world's democracies came to Canada's defense. Not long after that, we had the brutal murder of Khashoggi. And I felt that had the democracies stood up alongside Canada, when Canada called for Badawi's release, then Mohammed bin Salman might not have been emboldened to feel that he could act with impunity. Same with regard to Iran. 2018 and now 2019 have been the worst period with regard to human rights violations in Iran. We have a situation where, for the first time, environmental protection in Iran, at a time that Iran needs environmental protection, they have put the leading environmentalists in Iran in prison. It's a kind of Orwellian and Kafkaesque maneuver at the same time. We have Nasreen Sotoudeh, an iconic human rights lawyer who's gone down the line to protect women in Iran, to protect juveniles in Iran, to protect journalists in Iran, to protect human rights defenders. Now she too has become a political prisoner, sentenced, and she's a woman in her mid-50s, to 38 years of imprisonment, 148 lashes, and after that cruel punishment, what happens? The United Nations elect Iran to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. So the international community has got to be more responsible, and democracies have to work together, and we have to give expression to those principles which we say we abide by, but we must do it. And political prisoners are a looking glass. They're a looking glass into the resurgent global authoritarianism on the one hand, and they're a looking glass into the retreat of democracies on the other. And so we have to stand up for those political prisoners, those of them who are journalists as well. You're defending political prisoners, you're defending journalists. We have to stand up for them. And if we do so, we will be holding those resurgent global authoritarians accountable, and we will be protecting the democracies. Well, the thing is, it really dovetails with what I've been doing, because the principles that underpin the establishment of this panel is really how do we protect these fundamental principles of expression, of press, how do we promote and protect democracies, how do we hold the violators of journalistic rights accountable. It's really, in a way, a continuation, and I feel I will be the beneficiary of that repository of experience and expertise on that group, so that I'll be able to do the rest of my work better.